the last couple of days, I've been traveling around Florida presenting and sharing this information with realtors. And when I introduce myself at receptions and such, and people don't know if I'm a realtor and how long I've been in business, and I'm like, oh no, I work at NAR. They go, oh goodness, are you okay? The good thing is I'm not an attorney, so I'm like totally fine. I'm busy, but I'm fine. As we look at the real estate market today, it's definitely changing. It's definitely evolving, and I think it's fascinating. So I'm gonna give you 2 slides to level set before we get into the latest trends. So the first one, when we actually look at the real estate market, did you all know that 27% of realtors started since 2020? This is striking to me because as everyone's grappling with rule changes and figuring out what to do with buyer agency, there's some folks out there who are so brand new to the industry, who jumped in when rates were really low and the real estate market was really hot, and now they're grappling with, oh my goodness, this is a different market. And in Florida, you're not feeling it as much as some areas of the country where I go to, and they're like, oh no, it's an extreme buyer's market here. And you're like, oh, okay, so they're really dealing with a huge change. What I also know when I look at this data is that when people join into real estate to be an entrepreneur, to be their own boss, because of their love of real estate, what we see is a lot of people stay in, and their expectation to stay in grows over time, and we see that 10 years of experience is the norm, and so people stay settled. We also know that a lot of firms out there are just mom and pops. We talk about the big names, we talk about the big brokerages, we know the names out there, and you may work for them. But a lot of folks, too, who are independent contractors decide they want to be on their own brokerage, and so the vast majority are just small firms. And so you're grappling with the same things as everyone else in this room. Inventory, affordability, keeping up with technology, now the big changes. And so as we look at that, the struggle is real. And let's go forward. The second thing I want to level set with is that as we look at 2023 and we look at home sales data, it was the lowest sales volume that we've had since 1995. Now, there's a publication that starts with an I who yesterday said, oh, there's an economist who says this is going to be the worst sales volume in 2024 since 1995. We already did that, so that's cool. Now, 1995 for me was yesterday because I'm an old millennial, a geriatric millennial, as people like to call them, elderly millennial. We've heard this term? Yes? No? And as I look at this, I think that 1995 being yesterday was so, but it's not. In 1995 on a Friday night, you'd be hitting up Hollywood Video, Blockbuster Video. Yeah? No one? No one went to the video store. Oh my goodness. Okay, this is fun. Yes. Now, of course, we're spending that Friday night in watching Netflix. But over that time period of 1995 to today, we also have 70 million more people in this country. And so looking at that comparison of 70 million more people, you would expect that we would have the inventory to support all of those people, and we certainly do not. And as we look at the inventory, we know that home prices are continuing to go up, and I'll give you your local data as well, and I know that Brad is really going to hit it home with the local data after me. And as we look at this, the bidding wars are continuing. Just in the last month of August, when it was sluggish, when it was a slower August than what we normally have, 20% of homes actually moved more than the asking price. There are still bidding wars that are happening in some limited areas at some price points, especially affordable price points around the country. So looking at mortgage rates, this is everyone's big talk of the town right now. Mortgage rates are having their day. And as we look at mortgage rates, I want to talk about a few things. So one is that the expected rate cut of 50 basis points, that was probably stronger than a lot of people expected, but that conversation started heating up and the Fed made that cut. What I'm expecting and what most economists are expecting is that we'll continue to see rate cuts. Now, Jay Powell, in his press conference, went into a lot of detail about housing. He was asked about it a lot from really top reporters around the country. And they said, okay, is this going to fix housing? And he said, no. The biggest thing that we need to fix housing is more inventory. That is what is going to fix housing when we talk about affordability, that it's not a simple solution. So when you look at mortgage rates, pretty much everyone was expecting that the Fed was going to cut rates. And the mortgage market absolutely understood that. So proactively, we started to see drops in the 30-year fixed over the course of the last month. And it's now, if we use the same reading on a weekly basis, we use Freddie Mac, we can see that mortgage rates are at 6.09%. So what does that mean? Well, for a consumer, if they were to have purchased a home in October of last year, a $400,000 home, and put 20% down, the ideal scenario that doesn't happen very often, they'd have an annual savings of about $4,400 on an annual basis. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for a lot of Americans. As we look at local home prices, we try and mix it up here. We just get some different scenarios. You can see pretty substantial savings, $800 a month, $1,400 a month, depending on that home price. And that's where it really starts adding up for consumers. Now, is that going to fix the ability for someone to save for a down payment, the biggest hurdle to enter into homeownership? No, it's certainly not. The other thing that I want to give you here, though, is that my challenge to you, I'm going to give you a few challenges. This is my first one. Tell the truth, get this information out there, because if I open up social media, it is rare for me not to see something that says, I'm going to wait to buy till interest rates go down to 2%. You're going to be waiting a very long time. And when we look at this data, what we can see is that historically, mortgage interest rates dating back to 1971, the average is 7.74%. And I have been asked in the last week by an ABC reporter, ABC, that's a major media outlet, when are rates going to go back down to 3? And I was like, oh, sweetie, they're not. I didn't say that to her because I wanted to be quoted, but I also wanted to keep my job. So I just said, no, so let me talk about the fundamentals. And so I walked him through with her that we were in a very unusual environment. But I think it's really helpful to get that word out, because if I'm hearing it from a reporter and I'm hearing it from social media, that means that your consumers are hearing that. They're not hearing you tell the truth about the fact that this is a lower interest rate than where we were a year ago, and it's also lower than the historical average. When we look at home prices, this is the big question, right? Is the home price gain that we're seeing right now. And I'm going to show you two little lines here. One is looking at new home prices and one is existing home prices. And it used to be that new homes always had that price premium. But in recent months, what we've actually seen is that new homes are more on par with existing home inventory. And it's a couple of reasons at hand here. One, we still see those bidding wars. So seeing last month that just 20% of homes went more than asking, that's actually slightly lower than where we had been. We had been quite higher than that, actually hitting at one point at the peak about 50% of homes moving more than the asking price. So that's bid up that price with that lack of inventory. The other big factor that we're seeing here too is that new homes are actually shrinking. They're getting smaller. This is a good thing. Home builders who are able to do this, who are able to build smaller units, are actually meeting the needs of consumers. And I'll show you a bunch of demographic data on why that's true. But they often say they can't do that. They can't actually meet those needs and to be able to do that and make a bottom line themselves, so they build bigger homes. It just makes more sense to go up, to add an extra bedroom. It's free once you have the kitchen and bath in there. That's what I was quoted this weekend by a big builder in Oregon. And, you know, it's unfortunate because there's so many single people in this country who are looking for a property. The other thing I'm going to give you here, too, is we heard a lot about the cost of supplies. Well, one of the things that concerns me right now is reading the news this morning. And as I read the news, I said, oh, goodness, there could be strikes of docks along the East Coast. And if that happens, that's going to impact our holidays, obviously, moving forward. It's going to impact the cost of goods. So we want that to be resolved as quickly as possible. Because if those strikes happen, that's also going to impact the cost of housing and the ability to build a home. Just like anything, like a weather event could happen, and that impacts the cost of goods too. So as we look at that, we have to be looking at the broader economy and just how hard it is to actually build properties today. So let's talk about the income that's needed to actually purchase a home in this country. It is staggering, and it's only been going up. So right now we see that you have to have a household income of about $109,000 in the US to be able to purchase a home. It's even higher in your local area with your local home prices. We actually see it's $225,000 for the qualifying income. Now I'm going to give a lot of caveats with this one. So this isn't in a beautiful, ideal scenario where you have 20% down for your down payment. And I see some shaking of the heads of that doesn't happen. It does not. The typical first-time home buyer is just putting down 8% last year as their typical down payment. So that means that the qualifying income has to be even higher. And that's what we've seen grown over time. So what does this mean? Bottom line? Well, unfortunately, what it means is that we're leaving out communities of school teachers and first responders, people who we desperately need to have jobs in our local communities to make them work. And unfortunately, they're being priced out of living there. The other thing that we know is that the inventory of existing homes, yes, it went up by double-digit percentage points. And I hope that I know Brad, will have this local data. But giving it to you on a national scale, what I can tell you is that percentages tell lies. Because as we look at the baseline inventory of existing homes right now, what we can see is that even though they went up by double digits, that just means it went up a little bit. Because base level we're under where we were in February of 2020, before, frankly, the housing market went completely bananas. So as we look at this, we desperately need that housing inventory. There's lots of estimates out there. Some economists say that we're short by 2 million, 3 million. NAR says we're short by 5 million. Again, that growth in population of 70 million people in this country since 1995 means they have to live somewhere. And right now we have a lot of people who are doubling up. In fact, at one point in 2020, what we actually saw is that young adults who were living at home went to high teens. Nearly 20% of all young adults moved back home to mom and dad. And in your house, you eventually wanted them to leave, or they had to go back to their job in the city center or back to school. And so they then re-entered into the housing market and the rental market, and they put a lot of pressure into those areas as well. We also know that there are a lot of elderly relatives who are doubling up as well. It is no one's American dream to move into a nursing home, and we know that family wants to take care of each other. And so as there's a changing of priorities, we have seen a lot of elderly adults move in. The other thing that we are seeing, and what I think is important to note, is that there is a big narrative out there that we are in a rental culture, that people want to rent. But we do see demand for housing. There are 2.4 offers for every home that was listed in the last month. There are multiple offers that are happening. Now, this is not as strong as the 5.5 offers that we saw when interest rates were quite low, but it's right along the historical norm here. The other thing that we see, and what I suspect that you see a lot of in your areas here, are all cash buyers. Yes? No? Maybe? Yes. Yeah. So the reason why, well, we know that baby boomers are outperforming in this metric because they're moving to a home that they're going to live in for a long period of time. We also know that more than 50% of vacation home buyers are purchasing with all cash. We know that it is more likely for a long distance mover, someone who's moving 500 miles or more, to purchase with all cash. And we know that more than 40% of mom and pop investors are paying all cash. So you're going to see a lot of all cash buyers. For the last 20 months, it's been about a quarter of buyers overall in the market. That's a very long period of time. If we look at this historically, we're talking about high teens. We're not talking anywhere close to this. At one point in recent months, it actually reached a third of home buyers bought with all cash, which is crazy to me. I don't think this is going away anytime soon. And the reason why we don't forecast this number, but I don't think it is. We're still seeing multiple offers. We're still seeing people gain housing equity. We're still seeing the fundamentals of lack of inventory, which means those bidding wars, which means that this is a cyclical thing which will keep fulfilling itself. And we're going to keep seeing all cash buyers in the market. The other thing that we know is that Florida has positive job growth. In fact, one of the most positive job growth states, if not the most positive in the last month. What we know is that people want to move to where there is positive job growth. And so we continue to see the mountain states, Florida and Texas, outperforming in comparison to other places. Why? Losing population, also negative job growth in that area. When we look at the change in population, obviously people are very attracted to Florida. You make the top of the list always, you and Texas, hand in hand. Other Sunbelt states go under the radar, but obviously the Carolinas, Tennessee, very popular places to move to as well. Sure, pandemic fueled some of this, but this was happening long before the pandemic, and you know this. You feel it, and you've worked with many clients along this line as well. So I don't like people that much. Like, I have to see a lot of people in my job. Like, it would be weird to have a job where I don't see people. And you all are people, so that's cool. But like on the weekends when I go home, I like to read a paper book, not even like a digital one. I like to be in pajamas. That's cool. And I don't want to wear makeup and I don't want to talk to anyone. But unfortunately, my husband likes people. And that's fun for me because that means he commits me to lots of things, including but not limited to decorating for Halloween, which I love Halloween. So we met on an even ground on this one. Yes, we've already decorated. Yes, I'll be buying more. It's okay. Target is there. It's fun. So when I have to talk to people, a lot of the times it's my neighbors because they're there and they have children and they play in our courtyard and we don't have kids and I have cats and it's just weird. And so I have to talk to them and we commit to doing things with them and they're always out there. But one of the things that I'm repeatedly asked by my neighbors is we live in a very large community. There's 3,000 units. It's very cool because it was actually built for World War II housing for the Pentagon. So very historic area. But it also means there's a lot of transient population there. And we have a lot of renter neighbors with little kids who ride their bikes and it's adorable, blah, blah, blah. Yay, people. So as we're decorating, I repeatedly am asked by like 3 different neighbors, so the mortgage rates have dropped. Does this mean I can buy a home? And I was like, no, dude, like you're a teacher and your husband's a firefighter. Like I love you all. I really don't. But you're not going to become home buyers anytime soon. And you're probably going to move because you're in the military. And like this is just not going to happen. And so I can't do that, though. Like I can't tell them that. But I'm going to tell you, please do. Okay. So not that. Like that's an icky Band-Aid ripping off thing. Right. So like I'm just nice. So what I would say, though, is to please tell the truth about the housing market. So one is the interest rates. This is the second one. We don't see a bubble. We don't see that there's going to be distressed sales today, tomorrow. This is our figure of distressed sellers. So we're asking realtors, did you work with a distressed seller in the last month? Mortgage Bankers Association has another one. It's whether you're seriously delinquent on your loan for the last 90 days. You haven't actually made a mortgage payment. They're also seeing single digits, 2.5%, 3% consistently. CoreLogic also has another one, 3.5% consistently. We just don't see it in the data. We need to build more housing. That is the fundamentals of why home prices are high. That's not the expectation that they're going to come down. Now, as we look forward at mortgage interest rates, I hate to say anything out loud because I'm sure I'm going to be wrong, so it doesn't really matter what I'm going to say. But what our expectation is they'll probably come down a little bit. High fives. When I said fives last week, someone's like, oh yeah, 5%. When is that going to happen? I was like, no. 5.9 means high fives. Like that is in the 5% range. So this is where I'm going to say high fives. The expectation of the mortgage market has been there for a long period of time that they are going to come down. Where we could see a drop in the 30-year fixed mortgage rate is if there is a narrowing of the 10-year treasury, which is traditionally 1.8%, below where the 30-year fixed has been. With uncertainty, that spread has gotten wider and wider. It happened at 9/11. It happened recently with COVID. So we saw that spread get wider. It's become more narrow. So if we see that become more narrow over time, we could see the 30-year fixed come down, okay? So that's what we're going to watch. As a team, yes, we're going to tell the truth about these things. Okay. All right, so let me go forward. I have some on international. I am certain Brad has, I'm going to give you 2 slides. I'm going to go fast. Yes, Brad? Okay, yeah. Okay, he's got this. Did you know that when we look at international transactions, 20% actually happen in the state of Florida? Yeah, y'all dominate here. You are not surprised by this data at all. The next thing I will give you, they are traditionally coming from Canada. That is the biggest share of buyers that you all are getting here is from Canada. Second is China, Mexico, India, and Colombia. Now, this is nationwide numbers, and Brad's going to have local. Okay, moving on to the next topic. All right, demographic changes. So this is my next chart, and this is my favorite chart in the entire world. Every nerd has a favorite chart. Economists love to call them service nerds, I think. I'm just going to say that I do, but this is my favorite chart. So we got little kiddos born in the last couple of years in the green. You can see there was a little boom there. People had fun when they were at home. And Then the bars get shorter over time. And as we look at this, people eventually go to heaven or they become ghosts. That's my understanding of how the world works. And so the bars get shorter, okay? So there's fewer people represented in the gray there. Smack dab in the middle of the room is the blue. And as we look at the blue, we can see that the millennial generation is the biggest generation in the country today. As we look at this, it's not a typo. There is a red bar there, the first red bar, 35 years old. That is the median age of a first-time home buyer today. That is towards the oldest that we have ever seen a first-time home buyer. Historically, if we look back at this, 40 years ago, a first-time home buyer was 28 years old. It has grown dramatically over time. Saving for a down payment, affordability, inventory, all the things we already talked about. But then you add in student loan debt, and at 35, you add in childcare costs, and then you have to get a car or a minivan to accommodate everyone in that house, right? And so suddenly, all of these debts are snowballing, and it makes it hard to save for that down payment. But I want to give you a couple of things here. As we look at this chart, you can see that there's a population boom that happens when people are in their late 20s, early 30s. You can see that on the chart. Those folks are already putting pressure into the housing market. They desperately want to be homeowners. Every survey that's done says that the American dream is still homeownership. So they are putting pressure there. The other thing that I will tell you is that we see another population boom for late teens, early 20s, and that's in the Gen Z generation. We already know that there are single digits Gen Zers coming into the housing market right now, but they are putting a lot of pressure into the rental market too if they have left your house, which I don't know that they have. Many of them are still living at home. As we see these two generations, this is the argument to build more housing, is right here is a demographic argument. Now, the counter argument that I often get is, yes, but there's a silver tsunami that's coming, and all of these boomers are gonna die off and leave all of these homes to young adults, right? You've heard this argument. It's out there. This is a lot of misinformation too. And why I'm gonna tell you this is that as we look at the yellow, you can see that that is the second biggest generation in the US today. And as we look at that, 58 years old, again, not a typo there, 58, the second red bar, is the median age of a repeat buyer today. And those folks are purchasing a home at a much later age than we have seen historically as well. If we look back at this 40 years ago, the typical repeat buyer was 36 years old. That is the age of a first-time home buyer today, essentially. This is a very big difference, and these individuals are purchasing a home with the expectation that they are going to live there for 15 to 20 years. They are not leaving these homes, and I'll add two numbers together. 58 plus 20 equals 78. Okay, I'll let you guys do the math, but I'm just gonna say that people plan on aging in place. So as we look at that, the expectation that they're going to leave those properties anytime soon, I think we have to forget that one. The need to build more housing is absolutely here today, and it's not going anywhere. Now, Gen Xers, I didn't talk about them at all. I skipped that generation altogether, and y'all are fine with that because you're used to being ignored. Yes, I know the median age of realtors, and it's right in that Gen Xer range. So as we look at that, I'll give you a couple Gen Xer factors. I will say that Gen Xers were most likely to purchase their first home during the housing boom, most likely to actually have left or lost that home, be underwater, stay there for a longer period of time, but they also have come back financially. They have rebounded and they are doing A-okay. They are a quarter of the home buying market overall right now. What I think is really fascinating when we look at the Gen X population is that they are the most likely generation to purchase a multi-generational home. So they are taking care of aging parents, they are taking care of kids they can't get rid of, they are taking kids of kids over the age of 18, so on and so on. And so as we look at this, 19% of Gen Xers purchased a multi-generational home. That is a staggering amount. That is 1/5 of those home buyers purchasing a multi-generational home. When we look at the household composition of home buyers overall, and we look back at the US population, I want to take us back to the 1960s, where 70% of American adults were married. That is a very large share. In comparison today, where just half of American adults are married. So as a result, we can see this represented in the housing market too. We can see a drop in married couples in the housing market, and we can see a rise in both unmarried couples and single women. And I'll talk about single women a little bit more in a second. But what I have to say is that a really big news outlet today dropped an article that said that co-buying is not great and that people have regrets about co-buying. And so I was like, wow, that's a really fascinating article. Like, did they use our data? And I read it and I was like, oh no, they didn't use our data. That's interesting. What was our data source? How did they get this? They basically said, and I hope, ladies, you will laugh along with me. They basically said, we're taking this as roommates who are purchasing homes if they have a different last name as the co-buyer. Yep. So good job, Wall Street Journal. It was an interesting decision that they made with that data. Yeah. So I sent it to a lot of my girlfriends and they said, oh, wow, I'm going to ask my roommate to do some things for me today. If we can like split bedrooms and stuff. They're all happily married with lots of kids. And so I just thought that was fascinating. Okay. Fascinating article. I said that I was going to talk about it on stage and I'm doing that. Now I'm going to move on. Okay. So 1/5 of all home buyers are actually single women. It is a growing share of home buyers. And why I dwell on this a little bit here is one, when we look at the real estate industry, we also know that 2/3 of realtors are women. It has been a growing share as well. If we look back at that data back in the 1970s, it was a male-dominated industry, and women really have become the biggest share, which I think is interesting. But as we look at home buying, we know that they really prize homeownership too, and they're making this their financial priority. They are more likely to buy with cash, but they are also making the most financial sacrifices as first-time home buyers to enter into homeownership. And why I dwell on this is because they're actually outpacing men. They're 2-to-1 when we looked at men. And in fact, if we look back all the way to the 1980s, men are just flat. They're 10% of all buyers. That's not to say they're nothing, but we do see that women are outpacing them, which I think is fascinating in the data. So I used to talk about all of this really politically charged information, and I would go to this one, and it was politically charged too. So here we are. So we'll just keep going here. And we know that there is a drop in birth rates in this country. As we look at this, we know that people are delaying having children, or they're having fewer children, or just choosing not to overall. And we absolutely see this in the data. It has been well written about a ton. In fact, just 39% of US households do have children in them today. And as we look at this, we can see this reflected in homeownership and home buying trends too. I suspect this could be a trend moving forward in home buying. And the reason why is we see more empty nesters, we see more boomers who are active in the real estate market. So their kids are probably long out of their household now. And as we see this, why does this matter? Well, it's going to change up a lot of factors, including where that person is buying, the number of moves they could be having, the size of the home they need. All of that is changing. And today we see a historic low of home buyers with children under the age of 18, just 30%. It had been as high as 58% back in 1985. So I used to give all of that politically charged data in this hot environment, and then I would say, oh, this is a much lighter note, but it's 2024, and so apparently we're not going to do light anymore. So now I'm going to talk about pets. Yeah. So did you know that 66% of US households have a pet? It is a huge share, and it has grown dramatically. There are so many articles on how pets are being pampered now, and I was chatting before this with PJ, and we were talking about just how we love our pets. I'm not going to detail, but it is truly fascinating. It is a $147 billion business in the U.S. Yesterday, I was listening to the Economist podcast, and it was detailing how people actually are putting their pets on private jets, and that they have amenity kits for their dogs so that their skin doesn't dry out. I kid you not. I was staying in a hotel, and I was looking to order room service, and they have a pet food menu with organic food for your cat and dog that you can order. And I was like, that's better than the human food that I'm seeing on this menu that I'm not going to order. It was really striking. So pets really are a tremendous business, and it should not surprise any of us in this room knowing how much pets matter now to Americans to see that 19% of home buyers are factoring in their pets into their neighborhood choice. And when we talk about unmarried couples and we talk about single women, these growing shares of home buyers, it actually gets closer to a third are choosing their neighborhood and their home based on their pets' needs. So thinking about hardwood floors and fenced yards, all of these factors, catios, and so on and so on. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about bridging the gap, and I'm going to give you guys a huge round of applause in all honesty, because this is actually pretty amazing when I look at the data and I look at Florida and see your homeownership rate here. When we look in the last decade nationwide, we actually have seen a growth in both Hispanic and Asian homeownership rates, and they're actually at all-time highs. And when we look at home buyers overall who are not white, what we know is that more than 50% of them are actually first-time home buyers. They are new home buyers into the market, which means that we're actually adding new households who are net new homeowners. That's impressive. And so as we look at the nation as a whole, what we can actually see is that we have 3.2 million more U.S. households who are Hispanic, who are homeowners. We have 1.5 million new homeowners who are Asian households in America today, and nearly 1 million new Black households who are homeowners in this country. And I want to give you some state data here because I think it's really interesting too. Your homeownership rate for all races is higher than what we see as a nationwide whole, for every single race across the board. Fascinating. And also for the Asian homeownership rate, it is nearly on par as the white homeownership rate. This is not true in every state at all. I do want to say that the economists who worked on this project this year said, we know a lot of the reasons why we continue to see a gap, and we especially talk about the Black and Hispanic homeownership rate gaps in America compared to the white gap in America. And they said, okay, so we know a lot of the reasons why, and we've really dug into this. And these slides have the citation here of our snapshot of race in America. And some of the reasons why are, especially for Black home buyers, not having a generational transfer of wealth. If you're less likely to have that down payment from the bank of mom and dad, which is always a good bank, then you're probably not going to be a homeowner yourself. It's going to be a lot harder to save for that down payment. We also know that when we look at Black successful home buyers, that they're more likely to have student loan debt in higher amounts, which we talked about being an issue already for all home buyers. That's just a couple of the issues. We also know that the denial rate for mortgages is higher. But then they also said, okay, let's flip it on its head and let's look at this report in a new way this year. Let's look at opportunities for growth. And let's look at a way to bridge the gap. So what they did is they took two metrics. One is the share of renters by each race who can actually afford to purchase a home. And I have to tell you, in your state, it's actually higher than in some states around the country. We can actually see single digits. We can always pick on California, for instance, where they have about 3% of folks who can actually afford to purchase a home. So within your state, we actually can see a higher share. So 26% of Asian renters within your state being able to actually purchase a home, 14% of Hispanic renters being able to purchase a home within your state. They then took it a step further and they said, okay, we already know that age is an issue when we talk about homeownership. We have a lot of kids born recently. We have a lot of folks who are aging, then perhaps they're not going to be homeowners anytime soon. So what is the share of the population who are currently renters who are going to be reaching that typical home buying age in the next 5 years? So looking at that, you can actually see 10% of both Asian and Black renters are going to be reaching that typical home buying age, raised to actually bridge that gap. All right. So I want to end on what I think is a positive note. The third challenge that I'm going to give you is to tell your story. Because again, people are going to tell it for you whether you want them to or not. When I look at the data that we have on agent use, when I look at that, it is quite positive. But what really strikes me every single year when we look at this data is that 70% of you actually volunteer in your communities. You volunteer an entire day out of your month giving back to the community where you live and you work and you love, and you want to bring more people into. Please tell that story. That is a positive story to tell. People want to hear positive stories. They want to hear positive news, even if they hear a lot of bad stuff. And as I look at this too, I also know that nearly 90% of buyers are working with an agent in the last year. They absolutely want an agent. They need your help. We know that there are multiple offers that are happening, especially for first-time home buyers. Having representation as they go through a very complicated process is incredibly important. We know that it's not just finding the right home and opening that home. Looking at your social media, I know the host of things that you all do, and we actually have a website that's devoted to 170 things that agents do that people don't think of. So if you need to borrow any of those things, it's on our website. The other thing that I'll give you too is that nearly 90% of sellers are using an agent in their home sales process. They need help pricing their home competitively, selling within a specific time frame, making sure they find that qualified buyer, marketing, and doing that all. We also know that there's tons of business models. Every single person in this room has a different one, and we know that full service agents are the most popular right now because it is a complicated process. It is a stressful process, and having your help really does make a difference to them. The last thing I'm going to give you here too is that this is not just a place to call home. This is also America's biggest nest egg. When we look at the net worth that is out there for a homeowner versus a renter, what we see, it's staggering. It is 40 times the net worth. The typical homeowner has $415,000 in net worth versus the typical renter of $10,000. We know that that nest egg can be used for retirement. It can be used to purchase a home, perhaps without a mortgage in their future, for remodeling, for putting their kids through college, for that generational transfer of wealth, so on and so on and so on. Everyone's going to use that differently. But that is people's nest egg. And lastly, what you're doing absolutely matters, and it adds into your local economies as well. When we look at the state of Florida, for every home that's transacted, it's $123,000 that is added into your local economy. It is a multiplier effect. It's not just purchasing that home, but it's furnishing that home, and it's everyone else who is involved in that transaction, from title to home inspectors to appraisers and so on and so on. So I want to thank you so much. What I presented today, this is a member benefit. We have a bunch of nerds in our group who are putting out information truly on a daily basis. We want you to use it. We want this to be easy for you to use. Follow us on social media, share what you see, read more if you want to, but it is there for you as a member benefit. So thank you so much for having me.